Remember those old cell phones? The ones that were like basically bricks with the big
Oh,
antennas?
yeah.
Crazy to think how much they've changed, you know? Like now they're these super sleek, powerful things we basically can't live without.
Right.
So in this deep dive, we're going to look at the business side of all that. Like, how did companies actually manage to adapt and thrive in a market that's like constantly changing? It seems impossible.
Well, that's where the idea of dynamic capabilities comes in.
Dynamic
Yeah,
capabilities.
it's basically a company's ability to not just survive change, but to really excel in a market that's constantly, you know, throwing curveballs.
So it's not just about having a good idea, it's knowing how to kind of roll with the punches.
Exactly. And even anticipate what those punches might be, stay ahead of the game. Think of it as this like three-part engine.
Mm-hmm.
First, you got to sense what's coming, what trends are emerging, what opportunities are out there.
Okay, for sense.
Right. Then you seize those opportunities, develop new products, new services, whatever it takes.
So sense and seize, got it.
But then there's the third part, and this is the real key.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
It's reconfiguring, being able to shift gears, adapt, and stay ahead of the curve. And the case study we're looking at here, it focuses on these major mobile phone companies.
Perfect example, right? Because you think about how much phones have changed.
Oh yeah, it's a wild ride through the history of how these companies use those dynamic capabilities or sometimes didn't and the consequences.
So let's start at the very beginning. We've got these pioneers, Ericsson and Motorola, basically creating this whole market out of thin air. I mean, it seems so obvious now, but back then it was revolutionary.
Totally. I mean, they sensed that people wanted this freedom to communicate, anywhere, anytime, a need that those old fixed lines just couldn't meet.
And they seized that opportunity in a big way. I mean, developing the first mobile phone systems and devices, like that's mind-blowing to think about. They basically launched this whole new era of communication.
Imagine a world where you couldn't just like pull out your phone and call anyone, anywhere. It's hard to even picture now.
Yeah. I mean, they really nailed those first two parts, right? The sensing and the seizing.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But their story also shows how important that third element, that reconfiguring, really is.
Yeah, the case study points out that while they were amazing at inventing stuff, their ability to adapt to kind of keep up with the market wasn't quite as sharp.
Yeah, brilliant engineers, no question. They built the foundation. But they weren't always so quick to, shift gears when the game started to change.
Which brings us to, well, Nokia. They stepped onto the scene, and what's interesting about them, I think, is that they understood that those clunky brick phones, you know the ones, weren't going to cut it in a world where consumers had, like, choices.
Right. They sensed that style and functionality that was becoming important. It wasn't just about making a call. It was about kind of expressing yourself too.
And Nokia, man, they really nailed that. I mean, those Nokia phones, those iconic designs, they were everywhere. You couldn't go anywhere without seeing one. But and this is where it gets really interesting. Even Nokia eventually hit a wall.
Yeah, they missed that next big shift. Smartphones.
Oof. So even being good at the first two, the sensing and seizing, doesn't guarantee success forever.
Nope. It's about consistently applying all three of those dynamic capabilities, not just at the beginning, but throughout the entire journey of a company. It's like a constant balancing act.
So it's like they got so good at those first two steps, they kind of forgot to keep an eye out for the next wave coming.
Exactly. And as we'll see, the company that really rode that wave was, well, Apple.
With a product that, again, seems obvious now in retrospect.
Oh yeah, hindsight's 2020, right?
The iPhone.
Mhm.
Apple had this brilliant aha moment, realizing that even the smartphones back then were still way too complex. People wanted something intuitive, something that just, felt seamless, especially when it came to multimedia.
And they took what they already excelled at, design and user interface, and they combined that with those emerging mobile capabilities, the App Store, iTunes, those were key parts of creating a whole ecosystem.
Yeah, it wasn't just a phone. It was like a whole shift in how we use technology. Do you remember where you were when you first saw an iPhone?
Yeah, it really did, didn't it? Like captured everyone's attention. But what's interesting is that even Apple, the company that's basically synonymous with innovation, they've had their moments where reconfiguring was a challenge for them.
Really? So even they can fall into the trap of like resting on their laurels, getting a little too comfortable with success.
Exactly. Their massive success with the iPhone, it kind of made them, maybe a bit resistant to change, at least at first. Like they were kind of slow to adopt larger screens, for example,
Mm.
even though it was clear that that's what a lot of people wanted.
Yeah, and their whole closed ecosystem thing, while it's elegant and all, it did kind of limit the kind of what's the word? Like the freewheeling innovation that you saw on Android.
Right, right. But, to their credit, Apple has shown they can adapt. They've incorporated new features, expanded their product lines, and even, opened up their platform a little bit. So they're not completely stuck in their ways.
Speaking of Android, that's where Samsung really saw an opening, right? They recognized that maybe a closed system wasn't the best approach in a market that's like constantly evolving.
Exactly. That flexibility, the open source nature of Android, it was a huge advantage. It allowed for, a much wider range of devices and applications. It was like the Wild West of mobile innovation.
And Samsung, I mean, their ability to reconfigure, it's been remarkable. They're constantly evolving their hardware, bigger screens, pen input. Now they've got those foldable screens, and they're taking full advantage of that massive Android app ecosystem.
And the results speak for themselves, really.
Yeah.
Samsung's become a dominant force. I mean, surpassing even Apple in terms of global market share.
It's wild to think about, like, the companies that have really thrived, they're the ones that haven't been afraid to embrace change, even if it means, disrupting their own successful formulas. They're not afraid to kind of blow things up and start over.
And that actually brings us to a related business concept: disruptive innovation.
Disruptive innovation.
Yeah. It's about recognizing those seemingly small niche technologies that have the potential to, like, completely overturn the existing market.
Is that kind of like how smartphones themselves were first seen as just like toys for tech enthusiasts? Nobody thought they'd be this massive thing.
Exactly. And the companies that, clung to the old ways, the ones that couldn't reconfigure fast enough, well, they got left behind.
Yeah, if you look back at the mobile phone industry, it's full of companies that were once huge, but they couldn't adapt, and, well, they kind of faded away.
It happens all the time.
Remember those Motorola Razr flip phones?
Oh yeah, those were everywhere.
But Motorola, like Nokia, they struggled to keep up with that whole smartphone revolution. Their reconfiguring just wasn't fast enough, wasn't effective enough.
It's a cautionary tale for sure.
So it makes you wonder what actually separates the companies that can navigate these big shifts from those that get left behind. Like, what's the secret sauce?
That's the million-dollar question, right? There's no single answer, obviously. But one crucial element is being able to recognize and overcome what's called organizational inertia.
Organizational inertia. Okay, that sounds kind of heavy. Is that just a fancy way of saying that companies get stuck in their ways?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
It's that tendency for organizations to resist change, even when that change is, absolutely essential for survival. Like, they'd rather sink with the ship than try something new.
So how do companies fight against that? How do they stay, like, agile and responsive in a market that's constantly, shifting beneath their feet?
Well, one important factor is leadership.
Well,
Leaders who are visionary, who are willing to challenge the status quo and embrace new ideas, they can make a huge difference. Think about, like, Steve Jobs at Apple. He was relentless in his pursuit of innovation, and he wasn't afraid to make bold decisions, even if it meant, kind of cannibalizing their existing products.
it's like having a captain who can see those icebergs ahead and steer the ship in a new direction, even if it means, leaving familiar waters. They're not afraid to take risks.
Exactly, but leadership alone isn't enough. You also need a culture that encourages experimentation, risk-taking, a culture where employees feel empowered to challenge assumptions and come up with new ideas. They got to feel like it's okay to think outside the box.
So it's got to be an environment where it's okay to fail as long as you learn from those failures. You don't want people to be afraid to try new things.
Right. Failure, it's often seen as this negative thing,
Yeah.
but in a rapidly changing industry, it can be like your greatest teacher.
Yeah.
It helps you identify what doesn't work and points you towards what might.
It's like Thomas Edison famously said about inventing the light bulb. I haven't failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work.
Perfect example. And it highlights another crucial aspect of reconfiguring, which is, being willing to learn from others, both inside and outside your industry. Sometimes the best ideas come from, the most unexpected places.
So don't be afraid to borrow, adapt, even steal good ideas, as long as you make them your own, of course.
Like Picasso supposedly said, good artists copy, great artists steal. Of course, it's not about just blindly copying. It's about, adapting and evolving those ideas, making them your own. It's about inspiration,
Hmm.
right? Taking something and turning it into something new.
It's like taking inspiration from a beautiful piece of music and creating your own unique melody from it. You're building on what came before.
Exactly. And in the fast-paced world of mobile phones, that ability to quickly adapt and integrate new ideas can be the difference between, leading the pack and falling behind.
But even with, great leadership, a culture of innovation, a willingness to learn from others, companies can still stumble,
Like,
right?
absolutely. Because there's another major force at play here, and that's, well, the market itself.
The market.
Consumer preferences, they're constantly evolving. What's hot today might be, old news tomorrow.
Oh.
It's a fickle beast.
It's like, think about how quickly we went from flip phones to touch screens, and now foldable phones are starting to gain some traction. Who even knows what the next big thing will be? It's impossible to predict.
Right. And that's what makes this industry so dynamic and exciting. And it's why reconfiguring isn't a one-time event. It's a continuous process. Companies need to be like constantly monitoring the market, anticipating those trends, and adapting their products and strategies accordingly. They got to stay on their toes.
It's like surfing a giant wave. You need to be like constantly adjusting your balance, your approach to stay on top. If you get complacent, you're going to wipe out.
That's a great analogy. And just like surfing, mastering that art of reconfiguring takes practice, skill, and a bit of, intuition. You got to have a feel for it.
So we've talked about, the importance of leadership, culture, learning, market awareness, but let's get even more specific. What are some tangible examples of how companies have actually successfully reconfigured in the mobile phone industry? Like, what does it look like in practice?
Well, Samsung's a great example, actually. They initially made their mark with pretty standard mobile phones, but then when that whole smartphone wave hit, they didn't hesitate. They jumped right in.
They didn't just like try to cling to what they knew.
Nope, they embraced that open Android system, which allowed them to experiment with all sorts of devices and features. They weren't afraid to try new things, to really push the boundaries, even if it meant going in, head to head with Apple.
So they saw the potential of Android and basically like reinvented themselves to become a major player in that whole new smartphone market.
It's pretty remarkable when you think about it. They weren't, the first ones there, but their willingness to adapt and experiment, it allowed them to catch up and eventually, well, surpass their competitors.
That's going to be tough though, right? For a company that was already successful to kind of shift gears like that.
It takes a certain mindset, for sure. They had to be willing to cannibalize their own business to a certain extent, like not be afraid to kind of disrupt themselves. And they had to foster that culture of experimentation, of rapid iteration.
It's kind of like, I don't know, a chef who's known for their amazing pasta dishes, right?
Yes.
But then they see this rising popularity of plant-based cuisine. They could just, stick with what they know, or they could embrace that challenge and become a master of vegan cuisine as well.
I like that. That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And it highlights how reconfiguring isn't just about, changing your products. It's about adapting your whole mindset, your whole approach to the market, being open to new possibilities.
So Samsung's a good example of a company that got it right.
Right.
But what about some companies that struggled with this whole reconfiguring thing? Are there any lessons we can learn from their missteps?
Well, Nokia's story is definitely one that offers some valuable insights. They were the dominant player in the mobile phone world for quite a while. Strong brand, loyal customers, reputation for quality. But then when the smartphone revolution came along, they were slow to react.
You mentioned earlier that maybe they were suffering from that organizational inertia, right? Were they just too stuck in their old ways to see what was coming?
That was definitely a factor, yeah. They were so focused on incremental improvements to their existing phones that they didn't grasp the disruptive potential of smartphones. They had their own operating system, Symbian, which was successful for a while, but it just couldn't compete with the flexibility and the app ecosystem of Android or iOS.
It's like they were driving a horse and buggy while everyone else was, switching to automobiles.
That's a great way to put it, and it really highlights the importance of looking beyond your immediate market. being aware of those emerging technologies that could completely change the game. Not getting too comfortable with the way things are.
So what's the takeaway here for our listeners? What can they do to make sure they're staying ahead of the curve, whether it's in their careers or in their own, ventures?
Well, the mobile phone industry, it's really a microcosm of the larger business world.
Yeah.
The same principles apply. Regardless of your field, you got to be constantly scanning the horizon,
Yeah.
looking for those signals of change.
It's like being a good surfer, right? You're not just looking at the wave you're currently on. You're looking at the waves forming further out, anticipating what's coming next.
Exactly. And you got to be willing to adapt. Don't be afraid to experiment, to try new things, to fail fast and learn from those failures. The world is changing faster than ever, and the only way to stay ahead is to embrace that change and become a master of reconfiguration.
That's a powerful message. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the evolution of mobile phones, I have one final thought-provoking question for you and for our listeners. We've seen incredible innovation in this industry, right? From those first clunky mobile phones to the sleek smartphones we use today. What do you think the next big disruption will be? Will it be something we can already see coming, like augmented reality or artificial intelligence? Or will it be something completely unexpected, something we haven't even imagined yet? As you go about your day, keep your eyes open for those signals of change, those emerging trends that could revolutionize the way we communicate and interact with the world. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those dynamic capabilities chumming.